Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 90. This is a user feedback episode, I guess. And by user feedback, we mean people have been angry about some of our content in the comments. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about those sorts of things. So Valve Steam Machine, we're going to bring that back up again. We're going to be talking about some of the latest RAM testing, DRAM testing that you have done on the Hardware Unbox channel, and then a bit of AMD, Nvidia market share stuff as well. So that's the episode for this week. Let's get into it. Steve, we have committed more internet crimes, and we're starting off this podcast by discussing the terrible things that we have done, because last week we committed the crime of suggesting that the Valve Steam Machine is potentially not going to be a highly successful product, and this made people, at least some portion of people, extremely upset, just very angry with us. Probably one of the, not that it got heaps of dislikes, but certainly more dislikes than the average podcast for us. And was certainly discussed a fair bit when we suggested that the pricing that we're suggesting or has been suggested by other media outlets is probably going to make the console dead on arrival. But some people didn't like that. So I'm assuming you are absolutely shattered about these crimes, and the jail time that we are going to receive for this is going to be a tough penalty to swallow.
I feel like we're doing this segment so often, I feel like I need a comfy couch and maybe a cigar to smoke or something for the internet crime section. I do believe leading into that, though, I accurately predicted that this was going to very much upset some people and that they were going to take to the comment section to vent their frustration. And I even preemptively tried to warn those people that they may not be about to hear necessarily what they want to hear, but instead it's our honest opinion. And again, we don't know pricing and all that. It was more just based on our experience and our understanding of the industry, it's going to be difficult for this thing to really make sense, because obviously it all hinges on the price. We don't know the price, but it's unlikely it's going to be priced where it would need to be in order to purchase it, or for that purchase to make sense in our opinion. Now, you may be able to justify it, and that's all good and well. But yeah, so that was the point of that entire segment, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was based on this whole, if it is this certain price that we are suggesting that it's most likely to be, then it will likely be dead on arrival, or at least dead on arrival in the way that we were suggesting. And it was interesting reading the comments, because we sort of did touch on it a little bit, like the Steam Machine, it has a niche use case. Like, you being able to play your Steam library on a TV, for example, is a use case. Like, that is something that people would purchase a product for. It's just we were coming from an angle of sort of, I guess, broad interest. Like, is this going to be a device that a lot of people are going to want to purchase and play PC games on, as opposed to building your own PC or buying a pre-built system or buying a game console like a PS5? And at the prices that we were suggesting is most likely sort of the $600, $700 price point, that it doesn't have that broad use case, I guess. And so, yeah, a lot of people in the comments were very upset that we were sort of suggesting like, oh yeah, but I have this big library of Steam games or whatever, and this is going to be a great device for me. But I think a lot of those people, firstly, were sort of probably expecting the price, and again, we don't know the price, but are expecting the price to be quite low. A lot of people sort of suggesting, oh, I'm definitely going to buy one of these as sort of like a second system for me, hook it up to my PC or hook it up to my TV, play all my Steam games, which of course makes sense if it's like $400. Like, that's not a huge amount of money if you're a PC gamer to allocate to a second PC. So you just go out and do that. But that equation, I think, changes significantly if it was $600 or $700. I don't see a lot of existing PC gamers who already have a decent PC to play on then going out and spending, high-end graphics card sort of money on a second system like that, especially with the performance that it has on offer. And so, yeah, I feel like a lot of the hype in general, having now read a lot more comments, seeing comments on social media as well, I feel like a lot of the hype for this product are coming from people who are already on the PC gaming platform, who are already Steam users and gamers, who already have a decent PC and are coming from it from that angle. Sort of like, yeah, I'll throw $400 on this, grab another, system and that'll be awesome. And sort of extrapolating that to thinking that is going to be popular for a mass market audience, which I don't necessarily think is true unless the price is sort of that low end level. Like I don't think that there's a lot of interest in a $700, $600 sort of system
Mhm.
competing against things like a PlayStation or building your own desktop PC. And again, this is coming from, again, we're sort of thinking about this because people like Linus were sort of talking about, was it the WAN show or something, where he was talking about the price with Valve engineers in the room. So he was suggesting around $500, and then the energy in the room wasn't particularly positive around that sort of speculative price, which suggested it will be higher. So
Yeah, we were more just seeing all the hype and excitement for it, and that's great. But we were cautioning people that, look, if you're expecting this to be like a $300, $400 machine, we're just trying to temper those expectations, because realistically, it's almost certainly going to be much more than that.
mm,
And, that's where it sort of starts to fall apart, and people are going to be pretty upset when, but again, we haven't got the official price yet. It's just more looking at the expectations that result in the extreme hype, and then what I feel are probably more realistic expectations, and that really
mm,
shifts, how viable it is, and how excited you should be for it. I don't know how to put this. There was varying takeaways based on what I thought was a pretty level-headed discussion. We gave the disclaimer that, of course, we don't know pricing. It was all very dependent on pricing, and so on and so forth. When I was raising my kids, right, when they were younger, they'd get really excited for a thing, and I could tell they were overexcited because they'd set the wrong expectations. And it was always
mm,
funny because as a parent, I'm like, do I sort of pour cold water on this and bring them back down to earth and say, well, it's not going to go exactly like that or whatever. And then when I did that, they kind of got angry at me for, downplaying the thing. So, or do you let them go in with the wrong expectations and then they get disappointed because it doesn't turn out being as amazing as they thought? And not to be massively condescending or say that I'm the people that were having this point of view are 11-year-olds or 6-year-olds or whatever, but I just find it a bit odd when someone just has a differing opinion, um, based on yet to be released information, like a different even interpretation of that information. And you don't it's not worth anything. Like, we're just having a conversation. This is a podcast. We're not deep diving and presenting tons of evidence and, making a case for anything. We were merely discussing what we'd seen and what we think is going to become of that. And to get like, some people genuinely got very angry and upset at us for having those opinions and trying to like temper expectations. And I just, yeah, it's interesting. And like a lot of people, I was surprised by how many people thought we were having an elitist take on this whole thing. Like
oh,
we were
the, the,
crapping on what it had to, and that was just an absolute, it's a comprehension fail. Like, it was a complete misunderstanding of what we were saying. First of all, we were trying to categorize the performance because that helps you work out the price that it can command, essentially. But they were saying, we're entitled YouTubers. We've been using RTX 5090s too much and so on and so forth. And again, I want this to be an exciting product. I want it to be a viable product that people can buy. The performance doesn't really matter whether it's an RX 7600 or an RTX 5090. It just, the price has to position it where it is a viable product. And that's basically what we're saying. We're all for cost-effective budget solutions. Like, in fact, I'm much more in favor of those because many more people can benefit from that. So we are all for an affordable gaming PC. But that doesn't mean we can make or wish the Steam machine to be something that it may not be. And essentially what we're
yeah,
saying is, we're not saying it's going to suck and you shouldn't buy it because of the performance it offers. We're saying that there will almost certainly be better value, better alternatives for you once this thing finally comes out, if it hits the prices that we expected to hit. Now, we could be completely wrong. This may end up being $400 US. I can't see it. But if it does, then, that's awesome. Absolutely fantastic news and a big win for budget gamers. With the way pricing of DRAM and stuff's going, and you've talked about this already, and AMD's caution that GPU prices are going to go up and stuff like that, I really do wonder what prices they can hit with this now because of that. And even with contracts and everything in place, I don't know, it's going to be interesting what happens next year with pricing and availability for all this sort of stuff. And because it's not going to affect that exclusively, like if a Steam machine becomes more expensive, well, it's going to be more expensive to build your own PC. But they all become unobtainium to this sort of the same degree, right? Because what you thought was, I'll spend $400 and then I can enjoy games on my TV. But then everything becomes more expensive and $400 is more like $800. And then it's a lot less attractive. But anyway, I'm always a bit taken back by the ways in which what we say or how we discuss things on the podcast, how they're interpreted, and then how personal or upset people get by that, when really it's just a free flowing conversation and we're just sharing ideas and thoughts on things. And ultimately, we'll have to wait and see how the Steam machine plays out.
I find the elitist take quite amusing and interesting because everything that we're saying about the performance of the product, which is largely where it came from, I think people were getting upset that we were saying this is like a below entry-level product in terms of its performance relative to the parts that you can purchase right now for gaming PCs. I feel like a lot of people, I guess they want to be told that whatever, I guess, products that they've got available right now, whatever they're buying right now, is in a category that is, I guess, maybe better or higher than it realistically is in if you were taking an objective look at the market. Because entry level or low end doesn't mean bad. It just means it's the lowest price points or the entry point to the market. And so if you're doing a proper analysis of the market and you're just sort of slotting in all the products that are available, there's going to be the most expensive products are your high-end products. There's some mid-range products in the middle of the range. And then you've got your entry-level products at the bottom of the range. These are not like derogatory terms for these products.
That's right.
They're just parts of the current lineup. And so everyone obviously wants their parts to be mid-range or high-end, but realistically that isn't the case. There are products that are entry-level or low-end parts. And when we're saying something is below the low end, that's not trash. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that compared to the current line of graphics cards available, the performance of this product is going to be below the lowest end product that you can currently purchase. So, I find that quite interesting. I think that boils into this take of the elitist sort of thing. Like, because we're saying this is below low end, we're therefore saying that it's bad because all PC gamers afford 5090s and stuff, right? But I think when it comes to this angle that this is a system that's built based around the typical PC that people have on Steam. Like you look at the Steam hardware survey or whatever, most people have 8 gigabyte GPUs and GPUs around the level of an RTX 3060 or whatever. And that's obviously true, but that doesn't change the fact that even a product like an RTX 3060 today is a below low end product because the products that you purchase today, the lowest end model on the market is faster than an RTX 3060. And so there's kind of two ways you can class those sort of things. Obviously, we were talking about, because it's a brand new product, the Steam machine is being released in 2026, the most relevant comparison in terms of low end or whatever is the other products that are available at that time. So we'd obviously be talking about the current generation of graphics cards. But then you can obviously as well also make, assessments of everyone's current hardware that you can get. Like what is a good PC, a middle PC, and a slower PC among all gamers today. And if you did that based on things like the Steam survey and whatever, you come to, a bit of a different conclusion because all of the previous generation products are included in those metrics. And that shifts everything down. So then things like, a 5070 is no longer a mid-range product. It becomes more of a high-end product because it is faster than what most people have. But that's not as relevant for a brand new product because people are buying this thing. I know a lot of people said they're potentially buying this as a second machine, but the idea of it is to be something that you upgrade to, because I think one of Steam's engineers was saying this is better or equivalent to about 70% of people on Steam. So they're clearly seeing this as an upgrade option for people. And so what matters for the upgrade option is the current products that you can currently buy, not all products. Because if we were assessing across all products, every product release would be a high-end product. And that's just not really relevant to sort of say.
Hmm.
Like at best, the current products would be like upper mid-range. And that's just not how I guess, you should really be thinking about those sorts of things. It is, of course, relevant for developers. They want to see like what's the sort of lowest spec that we can target, that sort of thing. But yeah, for upgrades and stuff, the current generation products make the most sense. So yeah, it's not an elitist sort of thing to say the performance of the product and how it compares to things in the market. And the thing that I think as well plays into this with the Steam hardware survey, this being a typical Steam sort of machine, is that by making the hardware target this sort of low end sort of system, you're actually restricting the market for it. Because if it's as good as a lot of people's current PC, there's going to be a lot less incentive for those people to purchase it as an upgrade. Because if it is the most common hardware, there's no reason to upgrade to that system
Hmm.
because it won't offer you anything. And so that's one of the challenges that you have creating these sorts of cheaper, more affordable, lower end systems, is that you make it more affordable, but you also shrink the market for it, unless it's super cheap and super attractive from that sense.
Yeah, that's right. And people who already have what is currently mid-range to high-end PCs, well, some of them might buy a Steam machine. I suspect a lot that just buy it just cause probably wouldn't use it that much, because when you're talking about mid-range to high-end hardware and then you go back to something of that caliber, it's like anything. Like, you say, you don't care about expensive high-end cars or whatever, and that's all good and well, but then you get one for a while and you drive that around, you do a lot of long distance driving, and then I'm like, hop back in the old car now, and you're like, ooh, oh yeah, okay, no, this is fine. So it's that same sort of thing. Like once you get used to something and then you go back to something else, it makes it a lot more difficult. But yeah, again, it's going to depend on the price, and it is very much targeting that more entry level gaming, which can be enjoyed by everyone. It's just like you said, if you've already got a good PC, then and then
Mm.
it's kind of like, why anyway? I guess I struggle with, because if I'm in the position where I have a pretty capable gaming PC, like even previous generation mid range, and then I'm like, well, I'm going to buy the Steam machine because it's, I don't know, $500, $600 US, something like that. But would I do that? Or would I just say, well, I'm just going to build a cheap PC and spend a couple of $100 more because it'll be a better system. It'll be a bit more flexible in the games that I can play on it. Uh, I don't know. I just,
Yeah, or roll that amount of money into your current. Like if you had a last generation mid range sort of PC, you could roll that money into upgrades for that system, which is
well,
another option that I think a lot of people would consider.
yep. Yep. So I don't know. I'm keen. Obviously, I'm very interested to see the price that it gets announced at, because then we can have a real conversation about this, because we're pretty confident we know like how it's going to perform. That's pretty well known at this point. We know the hardware it's using. We know how that hardware performs. And yeah, like the
Mhm.
performance on Linux might be a bit better than Windows, but it's not going to be miles better for the most of the games that you'll be playing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think they haven't announced the price for the simple reason that, firstly, if the price was extremely attractive, you'd probably announce it first. I think that's generally how most product announcements go. If you want to build the hype, so if you've got anything that is potentially going to dampen that hype a little bit, such as maybe not the most attractive price, you just announce what the product is, and then you later talk about the price. If the price is really attractive, most companies tend to announce that alongside the product, because that adds to the hype if it's seen as really good value. And
Hmm.
then the second reason, which you touched on, is the sort of price volatility for all of these components. They don't want to be announcing a price that they can't meet. So, if DRAM becomes much more expensive for them, NAND flash as well for the storage that they're putting into the system, if all those components become much more expensive to procure within the next, I don't know when they're launching in 2026, but let's say a couple of months, they don't want to say this is going to be $500, but then it comes to 2026 and it's $600 because
Hmm.
all those components have gone up in price. And they also want to build in some price tolerance there so they don't have to constantly change the price of the system. Because even if they've gotten great contracts for, let's say, the SODIMM memory that it uses today, they don't want to announce it and be like, well, the first batch of units that we made can be priced at, let's say, $500. But then everything after that, as we're rolling into newer contracts for memory, is going to be $600 and make that price change within a couple of months. I think that's not how most companies want to operate generally, want a bit more stable pricing in that sense. So yeah, that's going to be a difficult challenge for them with the Steam machine. But yeah, the as we've said many times in this podcast and last podcast, the price is going to be very interesting. And even with a product that Valve made that I think is, at least on the surface level when you look at it, is a much more attractive product and has a much wider potential to interest people in the Steam Deck, so their portable system. That has some clear reasons why, as a PC gamer, you'd buy that, because it is a very different sort of system, and it does attract people across from consoles and things like that who might want to have a portable system that can play those sorts of PC games. Even that system, I think Valve has said, has only sold about 4 million units in total, which if you compare that to console sales for things like the Switch, which is its direct competitor in handhelds, which has sold, I don't know whether it's at 100 million yet or above 100 million. I'm not sure. It's way higher. And then you've got the PlayStation 5 and stuff selling in that sort of, 80 to 100 million unit range at the moment. So when we're talking about, people saying this is like, this is where the Xbox is going to go, or this is an alternative to the Xbox, we have to start talking about those tens of millions of units numbers for it to be a true competitor. Making a product that only sells a couple of million units is largely just a niche device. And so that may upset people, sort of saying like a Steam Deck again is like a niche device. It doesn't, even though I personally think it is, I have one, I actually have two of them and they're both great devices. I think it's a great product. It's still, just because of the way that they're building up their console offerings, it's still a relatively niche product. And I see the Steam machine as being more niche than that. And that's potentially, if they made it a great price, it may only sell a few million units just from it not being this sort of mass market popular brand like a PlayStation or Nintendo Switch product. So yeah, that's that. Did you want to talk about yesterday's RAM video as well? Because again, internet crimes, we've committed them on that video as well.
Yeah, so there was sort of two sticking points with that video, and both of them, I guess, are a misunderstanding. So I thought I laid that video out really clearly straight away because I knew it was an unusual video. It's a sort of test that we've never done before because I don't think it's really ever made, well, certainly as much sense as it makes right now. Very topical. But somebody commented somewhere, it got heavily upvoted, saying, "Hey, Steve, could you please do a benchmark where you take one of your, 32 gigabyte memory kits with two modules and compare that with two modules and then with just the one module? Because right now I'm looking at buying memory. It's doubled in price. It's sort of blown my budget out. Can I get away with just buying one module now and then buy a second module later?" Which there's some inherent risk with doing that, but that's a separate sort of disclaimer you can give in the content. I thought, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And they were asking from the perspective of buying like a Ryzen processor, which I think made sense because I think most people are buying AM5 processors if they're buying a new CPU at the moment. The sales data seems to suggest that. And I thought there's not much point testing with an X3D CPU because they are less memory, bandwidth, and latency sensitive than just the standard Zen 4 and Zen 5 parts. So I thought 9700X, that's a pretty good CPU, fairly representative of how I should test. So that's all fine. A lot of people got hung up on the fact that it was a single channel versus dual channel test, and there was even some misunderstandings about what single channel really is with DDR5 and dual channel, despite the fact that, Zen 4 and Zen 5 on the desktop, the AM5 CPUs have a dual channel memory controller. To use dual channel, you need to have two modules in the appropriate DIMM slots. If you only have a single module, that is single channel. Regardless of how the memory is addressed, whether it's ranks and whatnot, that's still a single channel access to the memory module. So there was sort of that going on as well. But a lot of people were upset that I didn't test, for example, a single 32 gigabyte stick against two 16 gigabyte sticks, or that I didn't include to 8 GB sticks so that I could keep the dual channel functionality, though the ranking would be different against, and which was a bit weird because the entire premise of the video was buy one stick instead of two sticks. Because whereas the memory, say, was $100, now it's like $250. So you can still get one stick, oddly, for about $100. So you save $150 right now. And then hopefully in the future, when the memory pricing calms down, which we've seen historically, this happens in cycles, you could get an additional stick for half price, close to half price. So, it doesn't save you a huge amount of money. And I certainly wasn't advocating for one option over the other. I was merely asked if I could do the testing and present the information. And I did that. And, I provided the appropriate disclaimers, like you might not be able to get the same memory module in the future. So therefore you'll have to manually configure timings to avoid stability issues, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, a lot of people just seemed confused by the video, despite the fact that I thought it was very clear what we were doing and why we were doing it. And then sort of the other aspect of it as well was people getting hung up once again on the RTX 5090 being used. And while it's probably a more relevant argument than ever for that particular bit of content, because we're talking about what hopefully will be sort of a short-term, near-term strategy, whereas eventually you'll add the second stick in to get the full performance. But I saw one comment that sort of stuck out at me. I'll read it out to you. The comment goes, someone looking to save on RAM probably won't have the money for an RTX 5090. They'll probably end up with a 5070 or something. Wouldn't it be better to run this test with cards in that class? I'd be interested in seeing what the difference is around 60 FPS. I think this is a pretty common sentiment from people that see the 5090 and sort of, I would say, almost get offended that we're using this unobtainium product and therefore the results are worthless. They don't apply to them because that's never anything they would entertain buying. They can't afford it. So sort of like, yuck. I think that's maybe where they're coming from with that. But then I do see a lot of people saying, I'll be using a slower GPU. I'm happier with a lower frame rate. So this data is, useless to me. But the thing is, it's kind of a misunderstanding of what the data is telling you, what the data is showing you. And again, while I get what this person's getting at, with the 60 FPS thing, for example, the single stick, so with just one 16 gigabyte module installed, the 9700X averaged 168 FPS across our 13 games. It still did 140 FPS at 4K because we were still, in a lot of instances, more CPU bound than GPU bound. So if you're someone watching this content and going, look, I'm happy playing single player games or whatever games, I usually target around 60 to 90 FPS, let's say. That data that I provided in that video gives you all the answers you need. Because if a single module with a 9800X can throughput over 160 FPS at 1080p, then it's going to do 60 FPS. Like that's just how that works. Like it doesn't, like the scaling that you're seeing there isn't somehow the percentages aren't fixed in place. I mean, if they were, the testing would still be just as relevant. But I'm just skipping through the results now, and I don't think there was a single example where the FPS was anywhere near. Like Space Marine 2, you're looking at 90 FPS average. And because that's a really good example of a game that is heavily CPU limited, because we've got the same performance at 1080p as we did 4K because we're using a 5090. But again, the point is the 1% lows were over 60 FPS. So if you're targeting a frame rate under what the thing can do, then the margin's going to be zero. Like whether you have dual channel or single channel, 16 gigabyte or 32 gigabyte, using a lower end GPU it wouldn't have actually changed the result. If I'd used an RTX 5060 Ti, for example, the Space Marine 2 data would be identical. Like there'd be no change at all. All it does is it introduces another variable into the results sooner, which can mess with them. But yeah, there's not an example where we were anywhere near 60 FPS in all of that testing. So again, if you want to play at 90 FPS or less, this data tells you that getting away with one stick is going to be highly likely a successful strategy for you, something that you could get away with and not notice the performance difference. And as we've stressed time and time again in the past, if you are someone that plays at 60 FPS, then you really need not worry about CPU performance at all. Just anything relatively modern will achieve that frame rate, and you can see that in all of the benchmarks. So again, it's like it's a thing that's becoming more and more common as time goes by.
It's a weird one, isn't it? Like I've
Yeah.
seen that as well. Like the sort of misunderstanding about why testing is done. I think it's maybe I don't want to criticize people too much here, so I've got to be careful. But is it a lack of more modern science education? Does it go back to that? Because I remember in school being taught about things like the scientific method, like how research is actually done at science institutions, at universities and places like that, where it's all about controlling for variables. You want to make sure that the thing you're testing is the thing that you're varying, and everything else is controlled to minimize interference and other variables. And so this applies obviously as well to benchmarking PC components. You want the thing that you're testing to be the thing that you're testing, and all other aspects to be controlled as best as possible to reduce interference, reduce the ability for those other aspects to affect the result. So I think it's people not understanding that aspect. I think a large portion of people do understand this, especially people who listen to our podcast. And obviously in our Discord community, people, talk about this a lot, like the lack of understanding that others have about why testing is done that way. And again, if you research a lot of science stuff, that is how stuff is done. But then in addition to that, I think it's the sort of, I guess, that lack of understanding about what parts enable what certain levels of things, if you know what I mean. Like
Mm.
if a CPU can do
How to interpret
120
the data.
FPS, yeah, it's like a CPU showing 120 FPS means that a CPU can enable up to 120 FPS provided other components in your system are capable of that. And
Mhm.
same with the memory testing thing. It's sort of saying, if the dual channel configuration has 110 FPS, the single channel configuration does 100 FPS, that's just saying that either of those configurations can enable in that game up to that level of performance. And
Mhm.
so if you've got that GPU, as you were saying, that can only do 60 FPS, well, good news. The CPU and the memory can both enable up to 100 or maybe 110 FPS or some higher number, but your GPU is only able to achieve up to 60 FPS. Therefore, the limit is the GPU. The other components are not relevant. So you will get 60 FPS in that game, in that configuration. But I think people are sort of maybe misinterpreting things. And we've talked about this before, like margins. The margins that you see in CPU testing will therefore apply as margins to GPU limited results, which is not the case because the GPU is the limiting factor and things like that, which again, this can be confusing. I do understand how people are confused about this because GPU testing is a lot about the margins. It's about product, this product will give you X% more than this other product. But then when you talk about CPUs, memory, and other components, it's more about how much of the GPU does this enable you?
Yeah, it goes the other way around as well, because people will say, well, when you're testing lower end GPUs, you should use a slower CPU. So the
Yeah.
GPUs become CPU limited, because that's how the sort of CPUs people would be using. So again, if you've got a slower CPU, then you buy a higher end GPU, but you're playing Space Marine 2, you're going to see no extra performance. And it's like, but that doesn't help you. Like, it's like that's the equivalent of burying your head in the sand and having no idea about what's happening or which direction you should be going in. Whereas if you see the uncapped performance or largely uncapped performance, you can make an actual informed buying decision. And again, as you were saying, like, or alluding to, all the information's actually there with the correct test method, because you can see the true performance and you can work out, like, do I need that? And I don't know. So anyway, but I that comment jumped out at me because they're basically saying that they don't understand the testing at all, and they're just fixating on the fact that we're using an RTX 5090, but not fully comprehending why that is and then talking about 60 FPS. So again, the videos, that was a perfectly fine comment, really. But you see a lot of people that get angry. They're like, "This is worthless, waste of time, whatever." I only want this much performance, and it's like the video is invaluable to you because it tells you that you need not spend the money or upgrade just yet.
No, I think it comes back to, PC gaming is obviously growing, as we've been talking about. It's more mainstream than it's ever been, and I think the difference that a lot of people have today, I think, which goes back to education, is that when both of us were coming up in PC gaming and learning about these sorts of things, there was a lot of much more technical resources that you could go to, places like Anantech, for example, PC Perspective, the Tech Report, and we still have some of them like Tech Power Up still around and Tom's Hardware still around, but a lot of those websites were sort of the foundation of knowledge for, at least when I was, building my first PC and getting into learning about PC hardware. There wasn't a lot of like influencer content. There wasn't a lot of YouTube content, TikTok, Instagram. That wasn't really a thing. So when you were learning about PCs, you'd sort of, you'd read those articles, you'd learn a bit more about the components and stuff, learn about how testing methods are done. And around that sort of time, there were things like, Tech Report coming out with the frame time testing stuff and sort of learning how that's going to improve, the data that we get for these components. Whereas now I think a lot of the entry point to people wanting to learn about PC building and these sorts of things are more the sort of, and I don't want to, criticize too much people who are more on the influencer side of things, who just sort of present components, don't do as much in-depth testing, because it's good that they're bringing people into the PC ecosystem, as we've talked a lot about other channels. We're not, wanting to put them down or anything like that. But when that is your entry point, you're going to get a different set of, I guess, knowledge to start with. And you're not going to be as familiar with these things, like why testing is done that way and why, you need to be controlling for variables and things like that. And it's when you come to a channel like ours or maybe Gamers Nexus, or look back at those other websites that are still around, then you start to needing to learn those sort of things, and it can become sort of a larger barrier to jump over. Whereas I feel, as I said, back when I was building PCs for the first time, I was learning a lot more about those things before I started building the components. Whereas today, you can just go on, an Instagram reel or whatever, and someone will tell you these are all the components that you should build your system for at a certain price, and away you go. You don't really need to learn any of those other things anymore. So yeah, I think that plays into it a bit.
Yes, I've been toying with the idea as well, which I sort of did a bit of in the DDR4 versus DDR5 video. Did you see at the end where I whipped out the 9800X 3D and tested with the 5060 Ti, RTX 5070 and 5090 and showed the sort of uncapped performance? I like to think that helps some people. I'm not exactly sure. But I knew when, for example, I was saying the Core i5 12400F, when we moved from DDR4 to DDR5, we saw a 22% performance improvement. But I just knew that people were going to say, but that's only because you were using an RTX 5090. But in that example, we went from 107 FPS to 131 FPS. But we're using less than half, or about half, of the 5090's power. Because that card could do 234 FPS, and even then it's CPU limited with the 9800X 3D. But as I showed, if you grab something like a 5060 Ti 16GB, which I know is still a very capable graphics card, but if you were building a new system and upgrading for the future, surely you'd be looking at the very least RTX 5060 Ti levels of performance for the next 3-4 years, or however long you plan on keeping the CPU for. And that GPU rendered 141 FPS. So it was faster than the 12400F using DDR5. So you would still see that 22% margin difference with DDR4 versus DDR5. And it's what people have known and been saying that are sort of in the know with this. They're like, well, you've got to look at the CPU results, work out the performance, and then work out like what your GPU can achieve. And really you can do that by combining looking at GPU results and CPU results. We've made that content where we've done like, CPU and GPU scaling. But, and I've tried to, with that, multiple resolutions, multiple quality presets, but it's very difficult to provide a set of personalized benchmarks that just apply to like you, for example, or your use case. But even then, if you're buying a CPU, you want to know, for $500, for example, if that's your budget, which one is actually the best? Like, which one do I buy? Do I buy this, 12 core CPU or this 8 core CPU? So anyway, but not to rehash all of that because we've gone over that a lot. But I was a bit. I guess the main thing I was surprised with the 1-stick versus 2-stick testing was the fact that a lot of people seem to completely misunderstand what the the point of that video was. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the explanation for that is. Like, did they open the video straight away and then just skip to the benchmark results and then have no context for why we're testing those two configurations and then take to the comments? Because that's logically the only explanation I can come up with, because, within the first minute of the video, I explained that people have been asking if we could, instead of testing a memory kit, test a single module with the option to add an additional module later. It's an odd one.
Next thing I want to talk about is Nvidia and AMD sales share, because we have recently gotten some revenue information from Nvidia and AMD. They produce their financial reports, which I've always said are very boring, and as a sort of general gamer, not super interesting to look at. But I think one of the stories that I've found that has sort of grabbed more attention than normal this year has been, and we brought this up on a Q&A previously, was the report about AMD and Nvidia's overall market share. And people obviously use the Steam sales and things like this to also come up with numbers. But there was all this talk of, Nvidia's market share has increased to about 94%. AMD's market share is down at about 6%, according to, I think it was John Petty Research. And sort of at the time we made that Q&A, we sort of discussed you brought up some data from retailers here in Australia and things like that. And I was reading some of the feedback on Reddit around that time, and some people were sort of making fun of us a little bit for saying, well, you YouTubers know more than, a research firm. I'm going to, back a research firm, which, fair enough. But I think it's interesting to sort of, I guess, revisit this now that we do have more concrete revenue numbers from each of these companies. So I've looked at not just the last quarter of revenue from both Nvidia and AMD, but the gaming revenue that both these companies has reported since the start of 2021, because this is all publicly available information. Both Nvidia and AMD split out gaming revenue as opposed to other types of revenue. So this is not including data center stuff. Now, of course, the gaming revenue includes all gaming products made from both companies. So this is discrete GPUs, but also SoCs that use gaming, are meant for gaming. So I think for NVIDIA, this includes, for example, the Nintendo Switch APU. For AMD, it includes the console APUs as well. But in general, it gives us a good look at sort of real figures based on what these companies are saying as for their relative market share. So in the previous quarter, so the most recent figures from both companies, NVIDIA reported $4.3 billion of gaming revenue, AMD at $1.3 billion, which is a much better quarter than a lot of their previous quarters. And this would equate to, if you add both of those numbers and then figure out the share, about a 77% share towards NVIDIA, about 23% for AMD. So in the very latest quarter, if you add up all the revenue that's coming into the chip makers from gaming, and I am saying here that Intel's revenue is negligible, which is probably true, that NVIDIA most recently got about 70% of revenue. So again, you can sort of make up whatever numbers you want to say for what the actual unit share would be based on that, because NVIDIA products tend to have a slightly higher selling point than AMD. But that just tells us actual numbers based on revenue share. Now, not to say that the John Petty research is wrong, because I believe they were looking at the overall market of all installed models, which is different to what we were talking about largely in the Q&A, was the revenue of the products at the moment. So the share, what percentage of people are buying NVIDIA versus AMD right now, which is, again, different to things like the Steam, because the Steam hardware survey as well gives you a look at all products that are currently released, and that number is going to be different to the current share. But anyway, as we go back, the difference was pretty similar in the previous quarter as well. So NVIDIA 4.3 billion, AMD 1.1 billion, which gives NVIDIA about an 80% share, so about 80-20. And then Nvidia had a much better year prior to this, which I think is where AMD was probably struggling quite badly. You can go back to the first quarter of this year, the third quarter of last year. Nvidia was getting about 86, 87% of the total gaming revenue reported from both companies. AMD was down at about half a billion, which is very low. They've obviously increased that significantly from about $500 million last year to over $1 billion this year. So they've basically doubled their revenue. Nvidia's gone from about mid twos to threes, so like 2.5 to 3.5 billion. They're up at about 4 billion, a little over 4 billion now. So that sort of gives you a bit of an idea there. Nvidia used to be they used to have less of a revenue share once you go back to things like 2023 and 2022. Back then, 2022, for example, Nvidia had $9 billion of gaming revenue, AMD at $6.8 billion, which gives us a 57% revenue share to Nvidia. It was about 69% in 2021, 63% in 2023, and about 82%, 81% in 2024. So over time, obviously, Nvidia has become more dominant in terms of the revenue split between these companies for gaming, which I think has been reflected in the market share as well for these products. But I don't think it's particularly outrageous to sort of claim things like the true market share at the moment for sales is probably somewhere in the range of 80-20, which is I think what we ended up saying in the Q&A for worldwide share of discrete GPUs and things like that.
Mhm.
And the other thing as well is that, you can pretty clearly see how much more successful RDNA 4 has been as a series compared to RDNA 3. Now, they were back up at around $5 billion, $6 billion for total year revenue for gaming in sort of 2021, 2022. They're currently at $3 billion for this year so far. So if they add another $1 billion, they're probably going to get up to sort of 4.5 billion. So not back as much as they were making in a couple of years ago, but certainly much more successful than RDNA 4, which I think people were using, and this is why I bring it back to that research from John Petty's. I think people were using that to sort of claim that AMD's RDNA 4 is not successful because they are seeing the market share decline despite
Mhm.
what reviewers are saying, like, oh, reviewers are wrong, people are just buying Nvidia. But then you go back to the numbers, and yeah, people are still buying Nvidia. Lots of people buy Nvidia GPUs, but certainly many more people are buying AMD products in terms of gaming now than they were last year. It's more than doubled. And so I guess that sort of shows us how much more successful AMD strategy has been this time around
Mhm.
compared to in the sort of 2024 era where their products were less competitive on pricing, as we've talked about a lot.
Yeah, it lines up with the what were I don't even want to use the term research. I spoke to a couple of people and they gave me some information. I guess that's research, but
Mm.
crude, quick, and research that I did about our local sales, which lined up with German retailers and roughly lined up with the information you can get from Amazon. So DNA4's done well for them, and it's done based on the information we were able to obtain locally. It's done exceptionally well for them here in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I think, NVIDIA, and the reason why NVIDIA has quite a significant share for these sorts of things is that, again, when we sort of look at discrete GPU sales, we're largely looking at AIB sales, right? Like the DIY market, what people are buying on places like Amazon, retailers here locally. Mind Factory has publicly available data as well. We're looking at DIY buyers. DIY buyers do things differently to things like the OEM market, which we weren't factoring in. We weren't factoring in the laptop market. And so Nvidia has, I would say, very, very high market share in terms of OEMs. Laptops, I think they're nearly at 100% for discrete GPUs. For OEMs, it would be extremely high as well. And so when you add that in addition to DIY sales, it's no surprise that Nvidia's revenue share is up around 70 to 80% and has been for a long time because they are dominant in those areas. But obviously, when we're talking about things like the DIY market, we're trying to give people a bit more information into things that are most relevant for our channel. We don't really cover laptops or the OEM side of things. We're interested in how these products are doing. And when we've been so critical of AMD's strategy over the years, it is interesting to look at, you know, were some of the suggestions that we were saying, now actually playing out? Has AMD's strategy improving? Is that actually translating into sales numbers, because we could
Mhm.
have been wrong about all those sorts of things, like saying, you know, AMD needs to make their products cheaper and more affordable and more attractive upon the reviews. We could have said that, they could have done it, and then they could have gotten the same number of sales. And so that whole thing would have been, I guess, wrong and irrelevant, but that doesn't appear to have been the case.
Well, yeah. I mean, fair point. It was never going to be the case, though. And as we brought up multiple times, they'd already done the thing with Ryzen, and they just weren't able to replicate it with Radeon for whatever reason. But now they've started to do that finally. Can't really explain why they've fumbled the bag generation after generation, and they were attempting to even for this generation. I feel like it's less of a pat on the back for AMD and more for the community, I would say. All the people that made videos, all the people that made threads on Reddit, X, social media, just everywhere. Because everyone was sort of telling them what price they needed to set, what not to do. Like the amount of comments I saw were AMD $50 off, that sort of stuff. And eventually got through to the right people at AMD and we stopped them from screwing this up. So, and that's really how I look at it. I don't really look at this as an AMD win. I look at this as AMD not screwing up.
Going back to that, the sort of marketing side of things, you can see that there's still a long way for AMD to go to actually have their sort of Ryzen moment. Like
Mhm.
today, if you sort of look at, I guess, the overall desktop market share for CPUs, again, Intel is still quite successful there because of OEM systems, but at least for the DIY market, it's taken them many years to flip from Intel being the dominant brand to AMD being the dominant brand. And while across this year, AMD has gone from about a 14% revenue share to up to about 23% now in the latest quarter. So that is a significant increase for them. They're still significantly far off having Radeon and their gaming division be in the position that Nvidia is in.
Mhm.
It's not like they can just flick the switch with one generation and suddenly make Radeon be successful. It's all the things that we've been talking about how they need to build the brand back up from this position where people weren't interested in buying products to a position where people are interested in buying them. And you can't just produce one product line and go, here, we've made this product, and then everyone starts buying them at like a 50%, share rate or whatever. Like that just isn't going to happen. And so, yeah, the path back to those positions where AMD's making in the $5 billion range, as opposed to probably for this year, three to 4 billion. It's work. They need to put in that work to happen. But anyway, since the start of 2021, I added up all the numbers in the market from that point. So nearly 5 years of data. In total, Nvidia has reported about $56 billion of gaming revenue, AMD $24 billion of gaming revenue, which overall since that point is about a 70 to 30% split in terms of revenue. And so that's the most solid evidence that we have for how things have gone for these companies, is the revenue that they report, that they're required to report. For AMD to have something like 10% share based on 5 years of data, they'd need to have an extremely high percentage of their revenue being non-discrete GPU products. So something around 80% of their revenue would have to be going towards producing consoles, for example, things that wouldn't count for discrete GPU market share. Obviously, NVIDIA would have to have 100% of their revenue being discrete GPUs, which again isn't the case because of other products that they make. But basically, that is how you'd have to get to something like 90/10, is about 80% of that revenue from AMD being non-discrete GPU products. So basically, that is the most real revenue data that we have available. And yeah, it's not crazily different to the sorts of things that we've been sort of suggesting is the case for the last little while. But ultimately, market share doesn't actually matter at the end of the day. For consumers, it's just about the products and isn't
Mhm.
something that we pay a huge amount of attention to. It's
Mhm.
just that for the financial data, I thought I'd go back and have a look and see if there's anything interesting to report there. All right, let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about our boring lives. All right, Steve, we're back. What has been happening in your boring life, I guess?
Well, my boring life, I've gotten out more than I normally would, so it's almost on the verge of being exciting. I'm not sure we would go that far, but closer to exciting than normal. I've been having to visit the physio more because nothing bad. It's all good. Just maintenance stuff, let's say. I decided to render my deck roof myself. Pretty big project. So I earlier in the year rebuilt the whole roof, tore down the old one, rebuilt a new one. The roof would be 15 meters by about 7 meters, so it's pretty big. I recently just put a heap of like fiber cement sheet up. So I think in the US they refer to that often as like drywall, maybe, because you use it in like wet areas, bathrooms and stuff. Anyway, it's like I think it's the Villa board, the Hardy stuff we use. Anyway, it's fiber cement sheet. That was fun, gluing and screwing that all into place. That took a while. Got that done. Then did all the join filler stuff, the base coat stuff from Hardy, sanded that back, and then primed it all, and then rendered it. So we decided that would be the way we would go, and I think it looks good. I'm happy with it, Tim. But to render it the way, because you can roll the full texture sort of render paint stuff on, but I just for the ceiling it doesn't really work. Like I don't know if people really render ceilings that often, but we thought we were gonna we decided to do that. We committed to it, and I trailed it on. Anyway, it looks awesome. Very happy with it, but don't recommend it, Tim. Don't recommend the job. I don't know why I didn't just pay someone to do it, but I decided to do that myself. It took me 2
Do you
goes.
regret your decision?
Yes and no. Part of me says yes, but part of me is grateful for the experience and having done it myself. So I don't know. I'm conflicted on that one, Tim. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Basically, it took about 3 days for my neck and shoulders to recover. Because it's brutal. Trailing above your head for, I think I did 2 5 to 6 hour sessions. The worst part about it is you can't just do a little bit and then leave it. Like you can't, you've got to, because basically with the render, you can only stop on like a join or like an angle. So like you do one wall and that's fine. And then you can do the other wall later. But because I had, I think it's like 90 roughly with the 90 square meters, and it was all just one face, I had to do it all in one go. Thankfully, I worked out a few techniques. Like you can kind of mist the edges. So when you get to a point, if you mist and like dampen the edge of the render, you could go away for half an hour or so and come back and then re-render it in. Because the problem is when it starts to tack off and go off, as soon as you touch that with the trowel, it rips it up. And then you can't like repair it because then it rips up the other stuff. Or if it goes off too much where it won't rip up, then it layers on top of the other stuff, and then you get a clear, like really thick line, a join line. So, because I did some testing to work out, what to do before I took on the big job. So anyway, that was the reason why basically I had to go for about, it probably was 6 hours all up with an hour or so worth of breaks. So after I'd finish a 15-liter bucket, I'd have like 15 minutes of stretching and stuff. It's the only way I could basically get it done. But yeah, so originally I bought the Dulux full render to try that out. And that was very, very expensive. But it was very easy to apply, I found, and looked very good. There was another, so anyway, Ibslice in a Discord chat, longtime member, a moderator. Yep. He used to be a paint pro, so he had some contacts and stuff, and he got me the professional stuff. I think it's Acrotex or something. I hope I'm not butchering that off the top. I think that's what it is, something like that. Anyway, it's like the professional render. It's like half the price. It applies, I would say, quite differently. It took a bit to get the hang of. But anyway, nailed it, Tim. Looks really good. Happy with it. So that job's done. But yeah, that was 2 days of pain. And then went and saw the physio, and I've seen him twice since, and I'm sorted out. I'm good to go. I'm good to render again, Tim. I think that's probably a job I'll never do again. I've done it.
Enough.
I can say I've done it. And I actually, not to toot my own horn, but I got pretty good at it by the end. I was like, oh, I could do more of this. And then I thought, actually, nah, this is all right. I'm done. I'm tapping out. So yeah, got that job done. I might put a photo of it in the BTS section on Discord later so you can take a look at it. I've got to pop all the downlights in later this afternoon. All the wiring's done and all the holes are there. I've merely just got to put them in because that's, you do that after you paint. So that's pretty much been the majority of my boring life has been troweling above my head and looking up to the point where I can't look anywhere else because my neck is compressed and fused my head in place. So hats off to the guys that do this sort of stuff. I think that's why I enjoy doing it, because it's like a good reality check, like not just sitting in the studio, my comfy ergonomic chair, which isn't this one I'm sitting on. It's my ergo human over there under the AC, just enjoying life, having fun. You go out there and I have a massive appreciation for the guys that do manual labor for their real job, because it's not easy. It reminds me of when we built your studio. Remember I had that like 3 or 4 kilo nail gun above my head for hours on end.
Yeah, that was a good time.
Whenever you have to work above your head, I mean, it's all bad. Don't get me wrong, but that's the ultimate bad. Like, that's God mode difficulty level on that. Just nightmare mode.
Yeah, I remember installing all the insulation and stuff and just first of all, having to lift it into the ceiling, but then having all the little particles just raining down on you for hours upon end. So that was fun.
That's a different kind of miserable lap, because it's not hard work in the sense that it's not heavy. You're still working above your head, so it tires you out, but it's not as grueling, but it's more the fibers, and having to wear all the protective gear and that, and the goggles fog up and the respirators, get condensation in them. That's not too much fun. And but I don't know. For some reason, I enjoy doing that stuff though. It's like, it's a weird thing, because I sometimes, some of it's like great fun. Like I really enjoy doing it. Like aspects of your build was heaps of fun, but you've got to do the fun stuff and the not so fun stuff. But anyway,
it can be a bit of a grind, some of it. Same sort of task over and over. So that's good.
Yeah. What have you been up to?
Oh, not that much. My life has been pretty boring and uneventful for the last little bit. Haven't really done all that much, to be honest. I think, what have I been doing? Well, just playing more Battlefield 6, really. They released the most recent map, which is Eastwood, to Battlefield 6 recently. It's a pretty good map, which is good because some of the other maps have been not as good. It's sort of, I guess, a medium sort of size map, and they've been continuing to fix bugs and improve things, which is good to see. So yeah, I haven't, usually when it comes to multiplayer gaming, about this time is when I have sort of noped out of it. I've sort of like, I've played like 80 hours or so. I've sort of done the game, which I know like you as just a Fortnite player, sort of more like you find enjoyment in playing it over and over again.
Well, look, you're not lying, but I did play RedSec the other day.
Oh yeah? I still haven't played it at all.
I recorded my game. I did pretty well. You'll laugh because jumped into a match, grabbed a sniper, a guy was running across, I hit an insane headshot. Insane, I'll show you the replay. And I was playing with some mates, and as soon as I hit it, I was like, oh, this game's too easy. Like, too easy for me. I'm going back to Fortnite. But no, I actually had a lot of fun playing it. I thought it was good. I enjoyed RedSec. I mean,
okay.
I wouldn't necessarily rave about it. I guess I went into it thinking I would hate it and it would suck. And I came away pleasantly surprised. So I had, I came at it from a very low expectations. So if I thought it was going to be awesome and I had high expectations, my opinion may be different, but I thought it was going to suck. I was playing it merely because Fortnite had downtime. So, the boys thought, let's play that. So jumped in and I had fun. I enjoyed it. So didn't really know exactly what I was doing because it was the first time I'd ever played it. But I got some guns and I shot some people, and we had a lot of success.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I feel like I think they've done a better job at, I guess, keeping me as sort of a person that plays a lot of different games throughout the year engaged more than I've seen with previous multiplayer titles that I've sort of played. even things like, Call of Duty or Battlefront or those games I've sort of played mostly, it gets to a point where I'm just like, I've sort of done all this, like, I've done enough of this. Like, it's just the same sort of thing. And not that Battlefield 6 has added tons of new content. Obviously, they've added the RedSec mode, which I haven't even tried out at all. They've added like 2 new maps, and they've added, I think, like new guns and skins and stuff that I don't care about whatsoever. But yeah, I just think the gameplay loop is a bit better than previous games and it's keeping me engaged for a bit longer. And I think part of it as well is that I'm just better at the game than I was with previous Battlefield games, which I thought would be the complete opposite because I haven't played a multiplayer game in so long. So I thought like, my abilities have withered away because I haven't, been doing any sort of aim training or any of that sort of stuff. Not that I do that now anyway, but just like I figured,
Mm.
you play single player games for a while and you're just going up against AI bots
Yeah,
effectively.
a lot of the skills are transferable.
I guess so. And not that I'm saying, again, I'm not the best player in the game. I think I'm pretty average, though I do tend to do okay in the leaderboards and those sorts of things. I don't really use the snipers at all like you were sort of using in RedSec. I pretty much never touch them at all. Play the sort of other classes like support mostly, with the healing kits and things like that, as well as the engineer class, so you can blow up tanks and things, just depending on the game mode. Like,
Mhm.
depending on how the team's going, like sometimes there's not enough people trying to destroy tanks or support tanks, so switch over to engineer for that. But yeah, it's been fun. One thing I have noticed though, and this has been quite interesting, is normally I play multiplayer games quite late at night, so sort of like 9 p.m. onwards sort of time is sort of that's, towards the end of the night, I'll jump into a couple of games and then go to bed.
That's because you're an adult.
Well, yeah, I'm an adult doing other things, so that's my gaming time, right?
Just wanted to get that in there for people.
The other day, I finished up some work and didn't have anything on. This was like 6 o'clock or something. I'm just like,
No.
I'll jump in for about an hour of matches or something at an earlier time.
Hang on, did you say you didn't
And
have any work?
well, I know it's crazy. So yeah, I jumped in. I did this. I've done this a couple of times now, around 6 o'clock, and the game is genuinely easier at that time of day.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah,
I find it.
Fortnite's the same as well.
I'm better. I do better on the leaderboards. More kills. The enemies, my opponents, I guess, are easier to play against at that time. And I guess when I normally play, sort of 9, 10, 11 o'clock, I guess that's when you get the sweaty gamers on, who are like much better at the game and make it harder.
Mhm.
Again, like I still enjoy playing at those times, and I still do pretty well in the matches and stuff like that. But just I felt like it was on easy mode, jumping in at 6 o'clock and just
Mhm.
cleaning up, like having the best matches of my life at that time. So
You're going to
anyway,
be
I thought that was
unavailable during those
interesting.
hours now. Yeah, look, Fortnite's the same if you want. Fortnite sucks these days in the sense that getting a win is very easy and nowhere near as rewarding as it used to be because the lobbies are largely filled with bots, so people feel good about winning a game or whatever. But
Yep.
before that was the case, it was much more difficult because you actually had 100 players and there'd be at least a dozen competent players in a given lobby that, would be a very big problem to get around. So back then, if you wanted to get a win, because I used to play with Zoe a lot, we'd play early on a Saturday because there'd be heaps of people on. So you just got a bigger pool of people basically, and
Yep.
it spreads the sweats out. So you have less of them in every lobby and more casual, normie kind of players. So I found the same thing. It'd be very easy to get wins during the day. And then the thing with late that you observed is, though, the later you play, at least with Fortnite, the harder it continues to get because you just get the diehard people that are in, I call it Fortnite daycare. So they're in there the whole time, and everyone else is all the sane people, all the adults have gone to sleep. I know I'm there, but makes sense, right? So yeah, the later you stay up, the worse it gets.
Well,
generally speaking.
Is it still the case that Fortnite tries to match people up a bit more based on your skill level, or at least like the squad leader? Yeah.
Oh yeah, heavy matchmaking, big time. Yep.
Yeah, I think in Battlefield it's a bit looser on that front. Obviously, there's they try and equalize the teams a bit, so you don't have all of the good players in the one team. But outside of that, they don't do a lot of trying to make every single person in your lobby a high level, which I guess sucks if you're bad at the game because you're going to get dunked on a lot. But
yeah, it's a big problem, but it's a tough one, especially in a game like Fortnite. Because the thing with Battlefield is, say I'm significantly better at Battlefield than you are, but I'm playing with some friends or whatever. There's still a chance you can kill me. Like there's a chance I will run past you or whatever. In Fortnite, you will never ever kill me. That's the problem. So, and
yeah,
the if the skill gap you can measure on a scale from 0 to 100, if you're like 80 and I'm 85, the chances of you killing me are just so remote. It's not funny. Like it's crazy. Like you go up one extra notch, and I'll. It's just wild. Like because you're able to, because of the mechanics, you're able to cover up and the building and editing and all that sort of stuff that goes in there. You go up another level, and then you find the people that are that level above you, and they might only be just a little bit faster or just play slightly differently, and it's just you can't even tag them. Whereas, I find, and I guess that's why a lot of people don't like it, because you can hop in like a COD or a Battlefield, and you have a chance of like killing a player that's definitely better than you just by catching them off guard or
yeah. And there's other roles in the games as well. You don't necessarily need to focus on killing to be a good player. Like if you're going around and supporting people by playing some of the
Yeah,
support
that's
roles,
right.
whether that's supporting the tanks, blowing up other tanks, reviving people, or just positioning yourself well in objectives and capturing the objectives in that way, you can have fun. I've had some games where I've had a shocking kill-death ratio, like way more deaths than kills, but I've still had fun and done quite well on the leaderboard. And it's like, I'm sure if you look up my kill-death ratio, my KD in Battlefield 6 is something like 1.3. It's not very good, but that's just not what I really focus on too much in the game, which I guess is probably why I'm enjoying it a bit more. Not that I'm like bad or anything in terms of aim and stuff like that, but you'd mop the floor with me in
Well, I've
any
gamed
sort
with
of
you.
sense.
You're
Yeah.
not a bad gamer.
Yeah, but like in a game like Fortnite, where it's very much about your speed, accuracy, skills in that sense, as you say, like you'd be a few notches ahead of me and you'd easily beat me every single time. Whereas in Battlefield, you can go around and camp on objectives
Yeah.
and stuff like that, which is a bit
I just
different.
looked up my KD. It's 5.8. So that's
In
my
Battlefield,
all.
it's pretty high.
No. In Fortnite.
On Fortnite,
I haven't played enough Battlefield. Yeah, 5.8 is my lifetime KD. This
Yeah, but if
season
you want
it's
to get
11.7.
well, if you want wins, right, you've got to have a pretty high KD because you got to kill everyone else in the match to get the win.
Yeah, you can definitely play as a pacifist for sure. Like you can win a match with one kill, right?
Yeah, because you got to wait till everyone else is dead at the end.
Yeah, you're just hiding bushes the whole game. There are people that do that.
Yeah, that's hard though. Whereas I guess in Battlefield you can have something like 10 kills and 20 deaths and still be in the top 3 players because you've captured 20 objectives or whatever.
There's a guy in the US. His sons used to play, and then they moved on, and he wanted to keep playing, but he's like very bad at the game. And his name's Bushcamp Dad. And so Fortnite has a ranked system, so you can play out of public lobbies in like official ranked lobbies. And so he gets to the highest tier, I think, pretty much every single season. And he doesn't belong there, of course, but he'll do it like basically by hiding, bush camping, as the name suggests. And he'll find different strategies each season to avoid players, like hang out in the storm as much as he can, or glide in the air as long as he can. He's quite popular, so it can be done. But yeah, it's a totally different style. So maybe one day you could be a bush camp dad, Tim.
Well, that's probably the only way I'd ever be successful in that game. So yeah. Another thing happening this week, and something that I'm very excited about, and we'll probably talk about more in future podcasts, is the Ashes is about to start. It actually starts today.
No.
So by the time this podcast goes out, day 1 will be complete. And so for people who are not familiar, especially people in the US who have absolutely no idea about cricket, this is probably the biggest rivalry in cricket. I think it's every 2 years, but it switches between Australia and England on a 2-yearly basis. So last time England came over to Australia to play would have been about 4 years ago. So England is in Australia to play Australia. England has not won a test match in Australia for a long time. I think it's something like 10 plus years. It's quite a while. And so I think Australia's got a pretty good chance, but this one is, yeah, certainly got some interesting dynamics going on. Australia's team is getting a bit older and has some gaps and holes in it, especially on the batting side. On the bowling side, a couple of our best bowlers are injured. So there's going to be some new players coming in to sort of field that as well. And England plays a very different style of cricket. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how that goes across the next 5 matches. It starts off in Perth with the first game and then goes throughout the rest of the next couple of months before we get to match number 5. And yeah, the Ashes will be decided. So I expect Australia to win the series, but we'll see how that goes. But I'll be following it pretty closely and seeing all these different matches. And yes, this is the sport that goes for 5 days per match. It's a war of attrition. It's quite a tactical game. It has lots of very interesting things, but something I put on in the background while I'm doing some benchmarking or something else. It's not something you can sit and watch like a TV show or movie where you have 100% focus on it. It's you sort of check in every now and then, see how it's going, see how the strategies are going, see how the batsmen and bowlers are doing. So yeah, that's how I sort of enjoy the Ashes cricket. But yeah, it'll be something like, again, I'm not super familiar with soccer rivalries, but something like Brazil versus Argentina or one of those ones, or England versus France, some of those matches, things like that. So yeah, the Ashes. Anyway, that's it for this week's podcast, I would say, because we've been going for long enough. No podcast next week because Steve, you'll be doing some traveling, so we won't have time to get to a podcast, but we'll be back in 2 weeks' time for the next podcast episode. If you do want to support the Hard Run Box podcast and all of our channels, we do have Patreon. You get access to the ad-free version of the podcast feed, as well as several other benefits, Discord community, monthly live streams, BTS content, all sorts of things. So yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.